When I was younger, probably around 14 or 15, my family used to go camping a lot during the summers. We always went to the same state park, the kind with paved roads and numbered sites and a central bathhouse. It wasn't exactly wild country, but to us, it felt like it. The woods stretched far beyond the designated camping area, and it didn't take much walking before you were completely surrounded by trees and quiet. We always booked the same site, number 28, which sat right near the outer edge of the campground. That gave us easy access to the trails that branched out from the park. My dad liked it because it gave him quick access to a creek he liked to fish. My mom liked the quiet, but for me and my best friend Evan, it was something else entirely. We had this little routine, this thing we called the ritual. Every night after dinner, once the sun had dipped low and most people were settling around their fires, we'd take our flashlights and walk into the woods. We didn't go far at first, just a short loop down one of the hiking trails, maybe 10 or 15 minutes out and back. But after a few trips, we got more confident. We started going further, stepping off the trail in places, walking through brush and trees, trying to memorize the way by the shape of the trees and the feel of the ground. We'd turn off our flashlights and try to see how far we could go by moonlight or just by feel. Sometimes we scared ourselves silly, thinking we saw something or heard something, but it was always a deer or a raccoon or our own nerves. That was the fun of it. We liked feeling like we were doing something a little dangerous, even though we were really just being stupid kids walking through the woods behind a state park. This one night, the third or fourth night of the trip, I remember the moon was barely out. It was the kind of dark where the trees just become walls of black around you. The campground itself was quiet. You could hear distant music from someone's radio and the occasional voice or laugh, but it all felt far away. Evan and I grabbed our flashlights, checked the batteries like we always did, and headed out around 9:30. My parents knew we were going but didn't worry much. We'd been doing this routine every night for a couple years now. They trusted us to be back by 10:30 or 11. We started off down one of the main trails, but then veered off to the left where there was a patch of old pine trees and a deer trail we liked to follow. It dipped down into a shallow gully and then up again on the other side where the undergrowth was thicker and the trees grew closer together. We liked it because you could feel the air change in there. It got cooler and stiller, and it felt like being swallowed up by the forest. That night, we decided to push further than usual. We made a game of it, daring each other to keep the lights off for as long as possible. We knew the rough direction we had come from, and we were confident we could retrace our steps if we needed to. Our sneakers were loud on the dry leaves, but we didn't mind. We weren't trying to be quiet. We were just talking, joking, daring each other to go deeper, wandering further than we ever had. We must have been about half a mile from the nearest campsite. Far enough that all the sounds of the campground had faded away and it was just woods. I remember we just crossed a dry creek bed and climbed up a little ridge when we heard it. It was soft at first, almost like leaves brushing together, but the sound stuck out because there was no wind. The air was still. We both stopped walking at the same time. Evan shined his flashlight behind us. I turned mine on too. The beams swept through the trees and brush, bright in the dark, but there was nothing there. Just branches, leaves, and fallen logs. I remember the feeling that came over me then. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like tension, like the forest suddenly felt heavier, like something was holding its breath. We waited a minute, listening. Nothing. We looked at each other, shrugged, and kept going, though we left the flashlights on this time. Maybe 30 seconds later, we heard it again. Whispering. Not just sound this time, but actual words. Too low to understand, but definitely someone speaking. Came from behind us again, closer than before. We spun around with the flashlights, scanning the trees. Still nothing. My heart was pounding. We stood still for a long time, just listening. Eventually, we decided to head back. Not because we were scared, we told ourselves, but because it was getting late. We started walking the way we had come, a little faster now. We didn't talk. The woods felt different, not just quiet, but watchful. Then we saw her. She was just there, maybe 20 or 30 feet behind us, crawling on the ground. At first, we didn't even understand what we were seeing. She was low to the ground, moving slowly, one arm dragging a little. Her clothes were dark, maybe black or navy, and she was absolutely filthy. Leaves in her hair, dirt smeared all over her face and arms. Her mouth was moving constantly, whispering random words, just a stream of nonsense. She didn't look up, just kept crawling forward, whispering, like she didn't even know we were there. I remember my stomach dropping. Evan froze. For a second, we didn't know what to do. Then she stopped moving, lifted her head, and looked at us. Her eyes caught the flashlight beam, and I'll never forget how blank they looked. Not surprised, not scared, just wide open and fixed on us. She stood up slowly, unsteady, like her legs didn't quite work right. Then she said something about looking for her campsite. That was it. No context, no panic. Just that she was looking for her site. Neither of us moved for a few seconds. Then Evan stepped toward her and I followed. She didn't seem dangerous, just wrong somehow, like her body wasn't working right. She swayed when she stood. Her speech slurred in places. She kept repeating herself, asking where her campsite was, what direction it was in, saying random names that didn't make sense. It hit us that she might be drunk or high or something else entirely, and it was clear she was lost, badly lost. We told her, gesturing and pointing, to come with us and we'd take her back toward the campground. She followed, but kept veering off the path, walking crooked, muttering to herself. We had to keep stopping and guiding her back. It was like leading a sleepwalker through the woods. The whole way back, I couldn't stop thinking about how far she was from anything. She had no flashlight, no shoes, just socks soaked in mud. Her clothes were torn in a few places, like she'd been crawling for a long time. The longer we walked, the more I realized how lucky it was that we had gone out as far as we had. If we hadn't decided to take the long route, or if we turned back earlier, we never would have seen her. And I honestly don't know how long she would have been out there. It took us about 20 minutes to get back to the edge of the campground. Once we got close enough, we started seeing the glow of fires through the trees, hearing music and voices again. She seemed to relax a little then, walking straighter, whispering less. When we stepped into the open area near the fire rings and campsites, she started looking around more, eyes scanning the tents and trailers. We brought her to the park office first, which was still open. There was a ranger there, and we explained what had happened as simply as we could. He looked her over, asked some questions, then started walking her through the campground, trying to find her site. We followed along for a while. Eventually, we reached a group near one of the larger sites, maybe 6 or 7 people around a fire. She walked right into the group like nothing had happened, and one of the guys looked up and just laughed, said something like, "There you are." Apparently, she'd wandered off from their site over an hour ago, supposedly looking for the bathroom, and no one had noticed she hadn't come back. They were all drunk, maybe high too. She was just another part of the mess. Nobody even seemed particularly surprised she had gotten lost. The ranger talked with them for a bit, gave them a warning about keeping better track of people, and that was it. Evan and I stood there awkwardly for a minute, then walked back to our own site. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about the woods, about how deep we had gone, how easy it would be to lose direction in the dark. I thought about how long she might have been crawling around out there. The dirt in her hair, the cuts on her hands, the way she whispered complete nonsense like it meant something. She could have died out there, easily. She could have passed out somewhere and never been found. We never did the ritual again after that. Not for the rest of that trip and not on any others. Stopped being fun. The woods felt different after that. Less like a game, more like something we didn't really understand. It was one thing to pretend to be scared, to imagine things in the dark, but that night showed us something real, something that actually could have gone very wrong. It wasn't a monster or a ghost or anything like that. It was just a person, but that made it worse in some ways. It made it real. I still camp sometimes, but I don't wander at night, and I don't turn off my flashlight. I was about 15 when this happened. My family used to go camping every summer at this big state park in the mountains. We had a pop-up camper and would usually stay for a week, sometimes longer if the weather held up and my parents weren't too burned out from work. It became our yearly thing. Some years, we'd even camp with another family or two that we knew from church or school. But that summer it was just us and my buddy Kyle. Kyle had been my best friend since 5th grade, and my parents always let me invite him along for camping trips. He was easy to get along with, didn't mind the bugs or the cold nights, and he'd brought along his own cot and sleeping bag. By that point in our lives, we'd done the camping thing enough that we weren't really interested in sitting around the fire with the adults or roasting marshmallows anymore. We were more interested in the woods, the parts beyond the trails, the places that felt untouched, like no one had walked there in a long time. We called it the ritual, and it had become our thing. After it got dark and the fire had died down, usually around 10 or so, we'd grab our flashlights and head into the woods. We never went too far at first, just a few hundred yards away from camp. But as the summer wore on, we kept pushing further and further. We liked the idea of trying to navigate without the flashlights. It was sort of a game. How far could we go into the woods in total darkness before one of us chickened out and turned on a light? It was never about scaring each other. We weren't trying to spook ourselves. We just liked the quiet, the challenge, and the feeling of being somewhere we weren't supposed to be. Somewhere that didn't have signs or paths. That night, we decided to go deeper than we ever had. We were maybe half a mile away from our campsite, maybe a little more. There was a ridge we'd always wanted to explore, but we'd never made it that far in the dark. It was the furthest edge of the woods before it started dropping down into a valley. We figured we'd reach it, stand there for a few minutes, and then head back before anyone noticed we were gone too long. We walked mostly in silence. The only sounds were the crunch of dry leaves and twigs under our shoes. Every now and then, one of us would flick on a flashlight to make sure we were still headed in the right direction, but for the most part, we moved by the moonlight. The sky was mostly clear, and even though the woods were thick, there was enough light that we could make out the shapes of trees and avoid tripping over anything too big. We were almost at the ridge when we heard it. A soft whisper, almost like someone breathing words under their breath, came from behind us. It was faint but definitely there, like someone just a few steps back, saying something low and slow, as if trying to talk to themselves or us without being noticed. Kyle and I stopped dead in our tracks and snapped on our flashlights at the same time. We spun around, shining the beams through the trees behind us. Nothing, just empty woods. Leaves, shadows, the same trail we just walked. We stood there for a second, not saying anything. Then, slowly, we started walking again. About a minute later, we heard it again. This time it was clearer and it sounded closer. The same sort of whispering, not loud, not fast, just there. Again we stopped, turned around, and scanned the woods. Still nothing, but the sound had definitely been real. We both looked at each other, and without saying a word, we started heading back in the direction of our campsite. We weren't running, but we were walking fast, headlights on now, scanning constantly. The woods didn't look any different, but they felt different. I couldn't put my finger on what changed, but I suddenly had the sense that we weren't alone out there. Not in the fun, what if something's out here kind of way. This was the kind of feeling that made your stomach twist and made you wish you'd stayed by the fire instead. Then we saw her. She was crawling. At first, I thought it was an animal, the way she moved so low to the ground. But as we got closer, the light caught on her skin, and we saw her hands, her face. It was a woman, down on all fours, moving slow and awkward, like she was hurt or trying to hide. She was covered in dirt. Head to toe, her hair matted down and full of leaves. She was wearing dark clothes, but they were torn in places and stained with something I couldn't identify in the dim light. She was whispering to herself, just random words, as if she didn't know anyone else was around. It wasn't like she was trying to get our attention or ask for help. She was just repeating things, short phrases, some of them made sense, some of them didn't. It was the most unsettling thing I'd ever seen in my life up to that point. She didn't react right away when our flashlights hit her. She just kept crawling, kept whispering. But then she looked up. Her face twitched in this strange way, and she stood up, slowly, like her body wasn't used to being upright. She was tall, taller than I expected, and thin, almost too thin. Her limbs seemed out of sync, like she had to think about each movement before she made it. She said she was looking for her campsite. That's all. Said she'd gotten lost trying to find the bathroom. Her voice was slurred, but not in a sleepy or confused way. It was thick, like she wasn't fully in control of her mouth. She was swaying a little bit on her feet, like she might fall again. We didn't know what to do. We were just kids, and suddenly we were face to face with someone who looked like she'd just come out of a grave. But she wasn't bleeding or yelling or anything. She wasn't threatening us. She just looked wrong, like something was off, way off. We told her we'd walk her back. We didn't say much, just nodded and started heading in the direction of the camp. She followed behind us, sometimes close, sometimes lagging a bit. Every once in a while, we'd turn around to check if she was still there, and each time we did, she had this strange look on her face. Not angry or scared, just blank, like her face didn't know what it was supposed to be doing. She didn't talk much on the way back, but we could hear her whispering again behind us. Just low, random words. Some of them sounded like numbers, some like names, some were just noises. We didn't ask her anything. We just kept walking. When we reached the edge of the campground, she seemed to snap back into reality a little. Her walking steadied, her posture straightened. She pointed vaguely in the direction of a few tents, and we walked with her until we found a site where a few people were still up, drinking around a fire. She didn't go into the light right away, just stood in the shadows for a second, watching. Then she walked into the camp, sat down in a chair, and started talking to one of the people there like nothing had happened. None of them seemed surprised or concerned. They barely even reacted. A couple of them laughed, handed her a drink, and went back to whatever they were doing. Nobody asked where she'd been or why she looked like she'd just clawed her way out of the woods. Kyle and I stood there for a few more minutes. Then we turned around and went back to our site. Later that night, lying in our tent, neither of us could sleep. We didn't talk about what we saw, not because we were scared to talk about it, but because we didn't know what to say. Something about the whole thing just didn't sit right. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just drunk. Maybe she'd taken something and wandered off and gotten lost. Maybe she was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe her friends were just too wasted to notice she'd been gone for that long. But none of that explained the way she moved, the way she looked, the way she whispered to herself like she was rehearsing something. It was like we had caught her mid-transformation, not into some creature or monster, but from one kind of person into another. Like we'd walked in on someone shedding their outer shell and trying to remember how to be normal again. She didn't look like a werewolf or anything. There were no fangs, no glowing eyes. But there was something under the surface, something raw and wrong and close to coming out. And I think we interrupted it. I think we stopped something from happening. Or maybe we just walked in on the tail end of it. Either way, I don't think we were supposed to see her like that. I never saw her again. Never found out who she was or what she'd taken or how long she'd been out there. But every time I think back to that night, I remember the whispering. I remember how she looked at us when we first saw her. And I remember the feeling in my gut that said we weren't just helping someone back to camp. We were getting away from something we didn't understand. And that was the last night we ever did the ritual. I went camping in Ginny Springs about 10 years ago. I remember the exact year because it was the summer right after I quit a job I hated and before I started a new one. I wanted to do something completely quiet, something that would shake off that numb kind of stress that sits in your back and neck and makes it hard to sleep. I had a basic 2-man tent, a decent sleeping bag, and a trunk full of stuff I thought I needed. Nothing too fancy. I wasn't trying to rough it all the way, but I wasn't glamping either. I was looking for real quiet, just some trees, the river, and a break from everything else. Ginny Springs is one of those places that you think you understand until you're actually walking around in it. When you see it online or in pamphlets, it looks like a clean, clear stretch of water surrounded by woods, with nice designated campgrounds. That's not wrong, but it's more alive in person. More humid, more bugs, more echo. The water is so clear you can see straight through to the bottom, and everything has that thick green Florida look to it. Deep shade from big trees, vines hanging down, patches of moss so thick they look fake. I got there a little after noon, parked my car in one of the grass lots, and dragged my gear down to a decent-looking spot near the Santa Fe River. It wasn't crowded, but there were plenty of other people out there, mostly small groups. Music from a few speakers low enough to be ignored if you wanted to. Kids splashing around, people grilling, the usual. I set up my tent in a spot I thought was perfect. It was on high ground, not too far from the river, and tucked a little back from the main trail. Some trees for cover, but not too many. I set up a small fire ring, made sure I had my food hung up on the rope line I brought, and then spent the rest of the daylight hours walking around and swimming in the spring. The water was colder than I expected, clean and sharp. Felt good. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't really want to. Everyone seemed to be keeping to themselves in the way that campers sometimes do. We were all in our own bubbles, with the occasional wave or nod as people passed. I made dinner a little after sunset, just a simple meal cooked over the fire. It got quiet fast once it was fully dark. I heard a couple of distant conversations, laughter from some kids deeper in the woods, the sound of someone zipping up a tent, the kind of sounds that die out one by one until it's just crickets and wind. I lay down in my tent sometime around 10. I had a small flashlight looped into the top of the tent, and I left it on for a while as I scrolled through some photos on my phone. Eventually, I turned it off and just laid there in the dark. I could hear the river flowing steadily in the distance, and somewhere off in the woods an owl was calling. It was peaceful. I was drifting off, half asleep, when I heard it. It sounded like something snapping in half. A thick, deep crack. Not quick like a branch breaking, but drawn out and loud. Then a full crashing noise that rolled over itself. Branches breaking, leaves thrashing, a final thud that felt like it shook the ground, like the kind of sound you hear in movies when a giant tree falls. It was close enough that I felt the vibration through the dirt under my tent. I froze, eyes open, heart thudding. I waited. There was nothing right after it, just the sounds of the woods settling back into place. At first, I thought maybe a tree fell somewhere deeper in the forest. I didn't know how often that happened, but I figured maybe it was normal. Trees fall. Weather, rot, bugs, any number of things could knock one over. Still, it was loud. Too close for comfort. But I didn't hear any shouting. No panic. No sign that anyone was hurt. So I told myself to calm down and just wait. Maybe 10 minutes passed. I was still awake, trying to listen for anything out of the ordinary. Then I started hearing voices. Not just one or two, but a bunch. Not loud yelling, but fast talking. People rushing to say something. Couple of people running. A zipper tearing open. Someone saying something in a sharp voice I couldn't make out. The quiet was broken, and it wasn't coming back. I sat up in the tent and unzipped the flap. The woods outside were lit a little from the moonlight, but I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. A couple of other campers were out too. Most were standing still, some walking quickly toward a section about 50 yards from where I'd set up. I followed them. When I got close enough, I saw it. A massive tree, an oak or maybe something similar, had collapsed straight across one of the camp clearings. Its trunk was easily 3 feet thick, and it had smashed down onto a tent. The canvas was flattened completely. I didn't see any movement inside, just broken poles and crumpled gear. A few people were standing around it in shock. Someone was calling for help. Someone else ran back up the trail toward the parking area. A guy with a headlamp stood near the edge of the mess, just holding his hands on his head like he didn't know what to do. Nobody really spoke at first. It was all just reaction. Some people tried to pull the tent free. Others moved stuff out of the way. But as the minutes passed, it became clearer that this wasn't just property damage. Someone had been in that tent, and they hadn't made it out. It didn't take long before we heard sirens way off in the distance. I guess whoever had cell service had gotten through to someone. A ranger vehicle showed up first, maybe 15 minutes later. Then an ambulance. Then, not long after that, a helicopter, one of those loud ones with the floodlights that cut right through the trees. They cleared people back, taped off the area with bright plastic strips, asked people to move away. They didn't say anything, but the way they moved told me what I needed to know. I didn't try to ask anything. I just stood off to the side for a long time, watching them work under the harsh light of the helicopter. The air was still and heavy, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Eventually, the helicopter lifted someone out. They were strapped onto a stretcher, covered in blankets and plastic. I don't know if they were already gone or not, but judging by how the responders were acting, I think they were. The tree had hit straight down the middle. If someone had been sleeping in that tent when it happened, there was probably no time to move. Just one loud crack and then darkness. I went back to my tent after that, but I didn't sleep. I laid there, staring at the roof, listening to every sound. Every branch shifting, every rustle in the underbrush. Everything sounded closer than it was. The image of that crushed tent kept looping in my head. The finality of it, how fast things had changed. 1 second, it was just another night in the woods. The next, everything was different. The next morning, the campground was quiet again. Not in the peaceful way it had been before, but heavy. People packed up early. A few rangers were still walking around, checking on folks, asking a few questions. I didn't say much. I didn't have anything useful to say. When I left, I walked back past the site where the tree had fallen. The stump was massive, split and jagged where it had torn out of the ground. You could see its roots still clawing at the dirt. There was yellow tape still flapping in the wind. The tent was gone. So was everything else. Just crushed dirt and tire tracks left behind. I kept thinking about how close it had been. 50 yards, maybe less. If that tree had fallen the other way, it could have been me. No warning, no time to react. Just the weight of thousands of pounds coming down out of nowhere. I haven't been back to Ginny Springs since. Not because I think it's unsafe. Not because I'm scared of camping now. But because that trip changed how I look at it. The quiet I used to love so much now feels different. It's not peace, it's potential. Potential for anything to happen while you sleep. For something massive to shift in the dark while you're unaware. It's not that I stopped camping, but I camp different now. I watch the trees. I look up. I check for lean, for rot, for cracks in the bark. I stay out of the path of deadfall. I don't assume the woods care about where I set up anymore. That night reminded me of something simple but serious. Nature doesn't owe you safety. It just is. And sometimes, when you're not expecting it, it reminds you. I didn't know the person who died. I don't know what they were doing before the tree fell, but I think about them often. I think about how easily it could have been someone else, and how fast the forest can change its mood. It's been 10 years, and I still hear that sound in my head sometimes. That long, cracking pop, the crash that came after. It's not loud in my memory, but it's clear, like it's waiting there in the background, just outside the tent. And that's the part one remember most. Not the shock, not the helicopter, not even the tent under the tree. Just that sound. The moment everything shifted, and the silence that came after. It was during the winter months in the Lowveld, somewhere along the northern boundary of the greater Kruger area, close enough to the unfenced zones where wildlife roamed freely. I had been working as a safari guide for several years already, but this particular incident has never left me, and it likely never will. The cold in the Lowveld at night can be harsh. People don't usually associate Africa with biting winter temperatures, but out in the bush during the dry season, when there are no clouds to trap the heat, the mercury drops fast, can hit freezing by the early hours of the morning. That night, we were camping in a small patch of open bushland, an area known to guides but not marked on any commercial maps. It was one of those remote guide-only stopover points with no permanent structures, just a few small clearings where we could pitch tents, dig fire pits, and stay out of sight from most of the animals. I was there with one other guide, a friend of mine from a few years back. We often worked with overlapping groups, but this was a rare stretch of downtime, just the two of us out on our own. We wanted to do a short survey hike the following morning, just a few kilometers into a less trafficked part of the reserve to check game movement signs and take some GPS readings. Nothing urgent, more like our version of a nature walk, except that here the stakes are a lot higher. We had set up camp just before dusk, boiled some water, and had a hot meal over the fire. Typical stuff: coffee, rusks, dried meat, simple grains. The kind of food that travels light and lasts long. The fire crackled through the evening as we sat on our fold-up stools, talking quietly and listening. The bush goes through these strange rhythms. Sometimes there's nothing but the wind through the trees, and then suddenly a whole chorus of insects, owls or jackals will light up the dark. That night, it was quiet. Too quiet in hindsight, No insects, no hyena calls, not even any distant whoops or grunts from impalas. But we didn't pay it much attention then. We were used to things shifting. When we finally turned in for the night, the fire was mostly embers, and we had our tents staked close together but facing slightly different directions. I had my back to the wind, the tent angled so that the breeze wouldn't rush through the flap. We always kept the tents basic, just canvas and mesh, no hard frames, no raised platforms. Just thick ground mats, sleeping bags, and a canvas barrier between us and whatever moved out there. I remember lying in my sleeping bag, fully clothed, pants, thermal shirt, jacket, even a beanie. It was that cold. I had the flap zipped tight and the extra flap clipped over the zipper to help block wind. I lay on my right side with my back pressed up against the canvas. There's this routine I always follow when I sleep in the bush. Pack my boots right near the flap, keep my torch under the pillow, and make sure my Leatherman is close to hand. All part of the same rhythm you build to feel safer. I woke up sometime deep in the night. I didn't sit up or panic or anything like that. I just kind of drifted up from sleep because something felt different. Something felt warm. It took me a long moment to realize that there was this really warm, soft pressure against my back. At first I thought maybe my sleeping bag had bunched up or shifted, but then I remembered I had cinched it tight. The warmth wasn't inside the bag. It was outside the tent. I could feel heat through the canvas, and not just heat, weight. Something large was pressing against the side of my tent. I didn't move at first. My heart rate kicked up fast. I was awake now, fully. The cold air in the tent bit at my face, but my back was warm. Really warm. The kind of warmth that only comes off something alive and breathing. I stayed dead still for what felt like a full minute, trying to control my breathing, listening hard. Couldn't hear much. The bush was dead silent again. No crunching, no snorting, no footfalls. Just the occasional breeze brushing over the top of the tent, the thin ripple of the canvas. But that heat didn't go away. If anything, it felt like the animal, whatever it was settled right up against me, resting. Still, I didn't panic. I've had buffalo walk right through camp before. I've had hyenas circle at night, and once had a honey badger rummage through a pack not 2 feet from my head. You don't get this far in the guiding game if you're prone to sudden movement or yelling in the dark. So I lay there, stiff, eyes wide open, mentally going through a checklist of what it could be. It wasn't small. That much I knew. This thing pressed against nearly the full length of the tent wall. I guessed a good 2 meters. It was big and solid, and that meant one of a few options. Lion, leopard, hyena. Buffalo maybe, but I doubted it. A buffalo would have crushed the tent flat by now. No, this was a predator, and it was lying down. The heat was unmistakable. That slow, heavy breathing. That quiet, rhythmic rise and fall. It was sleeping, and that's what froze me more than anything else. The realization that something had come into our camp, found the side of my tent warm, and just decided to lie down there for warmth. I didn't know what to do, and the longer I stayed still, the more that panic started to edge into my mind. Then I heard my buddy's voice. It wasn't loud. It was barely above a whisper, but I heard him from his tent, not 10 feet away. He said my name, or actually, he said my online handle, the one a few of the guys used back then when we traded photos and trip logs. But I knew what he meant. His voice had this strange, shaking edge to it, like he was afraid of even speaking too loudly. I didn't say anything at first. Then, out of some stupid need to reassure him, or maybe just to hear my own voice, I replied clearly. Yeah. The moment the word left my mouth, the warmth shifted. I felt it first, this sudden rising, the bulk of it peeling off the tent wall. I heard the sound of canvas flexing, the hiss of breath from the other side, and then this sudden thump 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 of something big moving away. It wasn't a rush or a sprint, just solid footsteps, quick but controlled. Then it vanished into the bush. That silence returned instantly, like nothing had happened. I didn't move. Neither of us got out of our tents. We just stayed there, awake until the sky started to turn that pale blue and the first birds began to call. When I finally stepped out, everything looked the same. The embers in the fire pit were cold. The grass was stiff with frost. But on the side of my tent, there was this clear, flattened shape in the dirt. Big oval paw prints, massive ones. Too big for a leopard. Too clean for a hyena. These were lion prints, and there were several. One large adult, at least, most likely male. He must have walked in sometime just before dawn, when it was at its coldest. Found the heat of the tent, found the warm shape inside me, and decided it was a good spot to bed down for a while. Maybe he thought it was a boulder catching heat. Maybe he knew. Either way, he rested right there for what had to be at least half an hour. The only thing that scared him off was my voice. I've had close calls in the bush before. I've had elephants charge, snakes drop from trees, scorpions in boots. But nothing ever brought that quiet, paralyzing kind of fear like feeling a lion's body heat pressing into your own, separated only by thin canvas and nylon. I kept checking over my shoulder all morning. We didn't do our survey hike that day. We packed up carefully and moved to another camp with more open visibility and a nearby ranger post. Neither of us wanted to sleep again so soon in a spot where a lion could casually wander in and curl up against us for warmth. Since then, I've never slept with my back to the tent wall. I keep a space between me and the canvas, even if it means curling up awkwardly or laying diagonally. I never again assumed that the warmth you feel in the night is just the cold playing tricks on your body. I've guided 100 more trips since then, and I tell people all the time, don't fear the sounds in the bush, fear the silence. Because it's when everything is quiet that something is probably too close. And sometimes it's lying right beside you. I've spent a good portion of my life outdoors, whether it's camping in the mountains, hiking across the Lowveld, or guiding tourists through the bush. You learn to expect the unexpected out here. That's something people say, but most don't really understand what it means until they live it. You expect strange sounds, unpredictable weather, close encounters with all kinds of animals. You even expect the occasional brush with danger. But no amount of time outside can prepare you for the moment you wake up with a full-grown male lion pressed up against your back, separated only by the thin canvas of your tent. This happened a few winters ago. I was guiding a small group through the Lowveld, one of those short 2-night camping trips we run for folks who want the real bush experience without venturing too deep or too far from the vehicle. Winter is a strange time here. The days are warm and dry, deceptively calm, but the nights bite. The cold rolls in hard after sunset, cutting through clothes, chilling the metal of the Land Cruiser, and turning the still air into something sharp and unforgiving. I always tell people to pack layers, to bring a good sleeping bag, and to expect the kind of cold that settles into your bones if you're not careful. We'd set up camp near a dry riverbed, tucked under a cluster of knobthorn trees, not far from a well-worn elephant trail. The spot was familiar to me. Flat ground, decent coverage, and far enough from the water's edge to avoid any surprise visits from hippos or crocs in the night. That's the trick with camping in wild country. You don't just look for a good place to sleep, you plan for how animals move. You think about wind direction, proximity to escape routes, where predators might roam, and how far the closest tree is if you need to get up high in a hurry. I always sleep in my own small tent, a one-man job that's just big enough to lie down in with a bit of gear. I keep the essentials close. Headlamp, knife, boots, and sometimes the rifle if we're really deep in. But for these more casual trips, I usually leave it stowed in the truck. Too many guests get nervous seeing a guide sleep with a rifle. That night, it was just me and one other guide, Dan, a quiet guy from Limpopo who'd been working camps for a few years. The guests were in 2 larger dome tents nearby. We had a small fire going before bed, the usual dinner of stew and bread, and the talk around the flames was light. No signs of lions, no fresh scat, no distant calls. It had been quiet for days. By midnight, the fire was out, and the only sound was the dry rustling of wind pushing through the grass. I had 3 layers on, including a thermal top and a beanie pulled low. My sleeping bag was zipped tight, and I curled up on my side with my back to the tent wall, trying to conserve warmth. That's how I normally sleep when it gets that cold, curled inward, facing the center, with my back toward the outer wall of the tent. I must have drifted off deep, because the next thing I remember was waking up slowly to a strange pressure on my back. It wasn't sharp or painful, just heavy, warm, oddly comforting, the way you might feel if someone big was spooning you from behind. I didn't move right away. My mind was still in that foggy place between sleep and awareness, trying to piece together what was happening. It was still pitch black inside the tent. No sounds, no voices, no crunching leaves. Just that weight against me. And the warmth. That was the first thing that really registered. It was cold as hell outside, but this patch against my back was radiating heat. Thick, solid warmth. And the surface wasn't flat. It had texture to it. Dense, coarse, a bit uneven. I've been around enough animals to recognize fur when I feel it. Not the soft stuff from a blanket or fleece. This was real. It had give, but not much. Muscle beneath it. I laid there, motionless, my breathing shallow. My heart started to kick up, not in a panic, but with a creeping awareness. There was an animal against the side of my tent. A big one. The pressure wasn't enough to collapse the wall, but it bowed inward, which told me the animal was leaning its weight against the tent. And that weight, judging by how much canvas was pushed into my back, was substantial. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't smell anything obvious. But it wasn't a hyena. It wasn't a kudu. It was too quiet, too still. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then shifted slightly to roll onto my back, careful not to press hard against the shape behind me. As I did, I froze. The shape moved slightly in response, adjusting its weight. It wasn't startled. It didn't react like prey. It was comfortable, relaxed, almost asleep. That movement said everything. Predator. My mind filtered through possibilities quickly. Leopard? Possible, but they rarely come into camp like that. Too elusive, too cautious. Hyena? Not with that much mass. And again, they're rarely that still. Buffalo? Not likely. They'd crush the tent without thinking. Elephant? Wrong size, wrong shape, wrong behavior. Then I remembered the warmth, and the silence, and the faintest deep rhythmic sound, so low it was more of a vibration than a breath. That's when I knew. Lion. My brain didn't accept it right away. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a big stray dog. Maybe I'd camped too close to a local path and someone's livestock had wandered over. But no, there was no mistaking the feel. I've seen lions up close. I've watched them sleep in the sun, roll over onto their backs like house cats, breathing slow and steady. And I'd felt that heat before, standing near one on a tracking collar op. This was that same kind of warmth. He was lying against the tent wall, not pressing, not clawing, not growling, just resting. I kept still for what felt like an hour, but was probably just a few minutes. My mind was racing. What do you do in that moment? Make noise and hope he runs? Lie still and hope he gets bored? I had no weapon in reach, no flashlight in my hand, just fabric between us and no solid wall to protect me. Then, from somewhere outside, came a soft voice. It was Dan from his tent. He called my name in a low tone, barely above a whisper, but I could hear the tension in it, the shake. He'd seen something. I stayed silent for a few seconds. My instincts said don't respond. Stay quiet. Don't move. But I guess my brain hadn't caught up to my instincts yet, because I answered, loudly, yes. The second the word left my mouth, I regretted it. The body behind me shifted. I felt the pressure lift as the animal stood, its weight shifting off the tent. There was a moment, half a second, where the whole structure wobbled slightly as the bulk of the creature moved away. Then the sound. A quick, soft thud of paws on dirt, the brushing of something large slipping through low brush, and then silence. He was gone. I stayed still for another 10 minutes before moving. My muscles had locked up from the cold and tension. When I finally unzipped the tent, I did it slowly, carefully. I scanned the area with my headlamp. No glowing eyes, no movement in the shadows, just empty scrub and the faint outline of tracks near my tent. They were unmistakable, white, round, padded, with claw marks just barely visible in the soft dirt. Lion, male based on size. He hadn't wandered into camp by accident. He'd come in quiet, walked among our tents, picked mine, and laid down against the side for warmth, like a big, wild cat looking for a bit of comfort on a freezing night. Dan emerged from his tent, eyes wide. He'd seen the silhouette earlier, watched it circle our camp and settle beside my tent, but hadn't been sure what it was. He hadn't dared move. It wasn't until I spoke that he saw the lion stand and slip into the dark. We found more prints that morning. A few near the vehicle, more along the tree line. He hadn't stalked us. He hadn't threatened us. He was just cold, and maybe curious. Or maybe he'd smelled warmth through the canvas and decided to share it for a while. We stayed one more night, moved the tents closer together, kept the fire going longer. But the lion didn't return. Whatever moment had passed between us, whatever strange interaction had occurred, was just a fluke of time and place and temperature. I think about that night often, not because I was scared. But it wasn't fear that stuck with me. It was the closeness, the absurd intimacy of it. A wild, apex predator, curled against me like a house cat looking for heat. It reminded me of my own cat, back home. How she likes to curl up behind my back when the room is cold. How her warmth feels through the blankets. That same slow breathing. That same quiet presence. Except this wasn't a 5-kilogram feline with a pink collar and a bell. This was a lion. A full-grown male, probably 200 kilograms or more, with paws the size of dinner plates and teeth meant to end things fast. And for some reason, that night he just wanted to cuddle. I never take warmth for granted anymore. And I never sleep with my back to the tent wall. Not because I'm afraid, but because next time the animal outside might not be feeling so friendly. And next time I might not get to wake up at all. The whole idea of camping alone had always appealed to me. Something about the isolation, the quiet, the simplicity. Everything seemed to fade away when you stepped into the wild. It's not that I was running from anything, but sometimes it felt like the solitude was the only real way to clear my mind. I wanted to escape, just for a few days, from everything. I'd been doing a lot of research into local campsites, looking for something remote. I wasn't interested in the crowded spots people talk about online. I wanted to find a place no one really knew, or at least not a place that got too much foot traffic. After hours of looking at maps and online forums, I finally settled on a small valley that was tucked away from the main trails, a place a little off the beaten path. It was near a river and a few old logging roads that looked like they didn't get much use. I made my plan, packed up my gear, and set off early one Friday afternoon. The drive out was long, but scenic. I could feel the stress of the week slipping away as the pavement turned into gravel roads and the trees closed in around me. As I neared the valley, the road became less and less maintained, but my truck handled it just fine. I wasn't in a rush to get anywhere, and I knew that the best spots often took a little extra effort to get to. I arrived just as the sun was starting to dip behind the hills. The valley was beautiful. Rolling hills on one side, a dense forest of pines and firs on the other, and the river cutting through the middle. I parked near a small pull-off, away from the road. There were no signs, no obvious trails, just an untouched patch of forest. I figured that'd be my spot. I threw on my pack, grabbed my gear, and started walking in. I wasn't far from the road, but it was quiet enough to make me feel like I was a world away. It was a little past dusk when I came across a guy walking along the same trail. He was older, probably in his late 40s or early 50s, and he had the look of someone who knew these woods well. I didn't think much of it at first, just gave him a polite nod. He returned the greeting and we exchanged a few words. He mentioned he was a local, and when I told him I was camping for the night, he offered to show me a good spot nearby. He said it was close to the river, camouflaged enough so I wouldn't have to worry about anyone stumbling upon me. It sounded perfect. I followed him for a few minutes through the trees, and soon we were at a small clearing by the water. There was enough space to set up a tent, but the area felt isolated, almost hidden. The guy seemed like he knew exactly what he was doing. He showed me how to make a fire, pointed out a good place to park my truck, and gave me a few tips about the area. He was friendly enough, but not overly talkative. I didn't think much about him as I set up camp. I made a fire, cracked open a beer, and sat back to listen to my friend's comedy podcast on my phone. I was loud, visible, and pretty carefree. I figured it was fine since it was just me in the middle of nowhere. As the evening stretched on, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck under the topper, next to my gear. I usually liked setting up my tent, but it was already dark, and the truck was easier. Plus, it felt safer, knowing I had all my stuff right there with me. The fire crackled softly as I climbed into the back of the truck. I pulled the topper down, made a little bed in the back, and settled in. The sound of the river was gentle in the background, the wind rustling the trees above. I turned off the podcast and just laid there for a while, watching the glow of the fire fade through the cracks of the topper. The night was calm, and I drifted off to sleep pretty quickly. The next morning, the sun was already up, casting golden light over the valley. I woke up with the sound of birds and the rustling of the wind in the trees. I didn't move immediately, but instead just sat up in the back of my truck, staring out at the river. It was a beautiful morning. The sky was clear, and the air was crisp, but not too cold. I decided to make a fire again and get breakfast going. There's something about a campfire in the morning, about the smell of fresh coffee brewing over the flames, that feels right. I cracked open another beer, there's no rush after all, and started cooking up some bacon and eggs. I could feel the calm settling in again. It was going to be another peaceful day out in the woods, just me and the river. Then, I noticed something. At the edge of my camp, just beyond the firelight, there was a figure standing. My first instinct was to think it was a hiker, maybe someone passing through, but something about the way he stood there made me uneasy. The man didn't move. He was just standing there, staring out into the trees with his back to me. I figured he hadn't noticed me, so I cleared my throat and gave a wave. "Nice day, huh?" I said. No response. I thought maybe he didn't hear me, so I tried again. "Beautiful morning." Still nothing. He didn't even flinch. I stood there for a second, unsure of what to do. I thought maybe he was just a little strange, or maybe he didn't want to talk, so I let it go and turned back to the fire. But then I noticed something even stranger. He started walking around the perimeter of my camp, slowly. It wasn't in any particular direction, just pacing back and forth like he was trying to stay out of sight. But he wasn't trying very hard. He wasn't even looking at me. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I could hear my heartbeat picking up. I decided to offer him breakfast, thinking maybe he was just hungry. I don't know why I did, but I said, "Hey man, you want some eggs or a beer?" He didn't even acknowledge me, just kept pacing, his back still turned, moving like he was trying to avoid my gaze. This wasn't normal. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I reached for the bear spray I kept near me and slowly slid it into my hand. I also kept my knife close by in case things went sideways, though I wasn't sure what I would do with it. I didn't want to start a confrontation, but something was off about this guy. I stood up and called out again, louder this time. "Hey, you need something? You've been standing there for a while, you know?" No response. That was it. I was done with being polite. My patience was running thin, and the unease in my gut was growing by the second. I took a few steps towards him and said, "Look, man, you're either going to acknowledge me, or you need to leave. Now." The man didn't even turn his head. His body didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge that I'd spoken at all. At that moment, I felt like I was staring at something that didn't belong, something that was either completely out of place or dangerous. My grip tightened around the bear spray. I took another step forward and said, "I'm serious." He didn't budge. No response. Nothing. That's when the panic really hit me. This guy wasn't just some strange hiker, he was something else. He wasn't making eye contact, wasn't acknowledging me at all. There was something eerie about the way he moved, like he was pretending I wasn't there, almost like he had no intention of ever speaking to me. I made my decision. I grabbed the bear spray from my waist and stepped closer, keeping my distance, but closing the gap. "Last chance," I said. "Leave. Now." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man turned. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. He just turned slowly, as if he had made up his mind, and walked off into the trees. I didn't wait. I grabbed everything I could, shoved it all in the truck, and started the engine. My hands were shaking as I pulled out of the camp, the unease still heavy in my chest. I didn't know if he had been watching me during the night, or if he had been out there for longer than I realized. Maybe he was just a local with issues, or maybe something darker. Either way, the experience left me rattled. I drove out of the valley faster than I had planned, taking the long way back to the main road, just to be sure. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something. I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. I'd never forget that feeling, and I'd never camp in that valley again. I never figured out who that man was or why he acted the way he did. But that morning, something had told me I was in danger, and I was glad I listened. Now, I always think twice before camping alone in a remote spot, especially when I can't shake the feeling that someone or something is watching. Camping alone in the bush was something I had been looking forward to for weeks. There was a part of me that craved the solitude, the quiet that only the wilderness could offer. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy company, but sometimes I just needed to get away, get back to nature, and be by myself for a while. I had decided to camp in a bit of secluded bushland, somewhere off the main track. It wasn't a well-known spot, and I liked it that way. I'd been hiking for a few hours before I found a good place to set up. The ground was uneven in places, but it was quiet, peaceful, and that was all I cared about. The area was dense with trees, thick with leaf litter and fallen branches. It was perfect, secluded, hidden, and untouched by the crowds that seemed to overrun the more popular spots. As I unpacked my gear and set up the tent, I couldn't help but appreciate the stillness. I was deep enough in the bush that I knew I wouldn't hear the sounds of cars or people. The forest was alive with its own rhythm. The occasional snap of a twig underfoot, the rustling of leaves, the soft hum of the wind moving through the trees. But other than that, there was nothing, just nature. The sun was beginning to set, and the temperature was dropping quickly, so I started a small fire to keep warm. I had my meal, a simple camp stove dinner, and then settled into my tent with my headlamp on to read for a while. The fire outside crackled and popped, the flames casting a warm, orange glow on the trees around me. The night was clear, and the stars above were brilliant, scattered like diamonds against the dark sky. It was peaceful, too peaceful almost, and that's when I noticed the silence. The crickets had stopped chirping. The rustling of the leaves, the usual noises of the animals in the bush, everything had stopped. I thought maybe I was just imagining it, but the longer I sat there, the more pronounced the silence became. I started to listen closer, trying to catch the usual nighttime sounds, but there was nothing. It was like the whole bush had gone still, holding its breath. The fire crackled on, but it did little to alleviate the odd feeling settling over me. I decided to turn in early that night, hoping the peace would help me sleep. After putting out the fire and securing everything in the tent, I climbed into my sleeping bag and tried to relax. The air outside was cold, but the tent kept most of the chill at bay. The only sounds I could hear were the occasional rustle of the leaves as something small moved through the brush nearby, the occasional snap of a twig, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. And then it came, a sound that cut through the silence like a knife. It was a soft, almost wet plopping noise, followed by a faint crunch. At first, I thought it was just a critter, a possum maybe, or a wallaby moving around. But the sound kept repeating, the plop followed by a squish, then silence. Then it happened again, a series of muffled plops that seemed to be getting closer. I tensed up immediately. I knew there were animals around, but this wasn't the usual sound. It wasn't the typical rustling of leaves or the scurrying of small feet through the underbrush. This was different, more deliberate. I lay there for a moment, unsure whether to get up and investigate or stay put. The silence that had filled the air before was back, but now it felt heavier, almost suffocating. My mind raced. Was it a larger animal? Predator? Something I should be worried about? I reached for the flashlight next to me and turned it on, shining it toward the entrance of the tent. The beam of light flickered across the trees outside, but I couldn't see anything. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't quite place. The plopping noise stopped, but I could still feel the unease crawling up my spine. I lay there for what felt like hours, my mind running through all sorts of possibilities. I was on edge, my senses heightened by the strange noise and the silence that followed. The stillness of the bush was overwhelming now. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't let me. Every little noise, every rustle of leaves, made my heart race. At some point during the night, I must have drifted off to sleep, because I woke up to the first light of dawn filtering through the trees. The quiet of the night had given way to the sounds of the forest waking up, the soft chirps of birds, the distant calls of animals, the faint breeze rustling through the leaves. For a moment, I felt safe again, the normal sounds of the bush reassuring me. I got up slowly, stretching my legs, and unzipped the tent to step outside. The cool morning air hit my face, and I inhaled deeply, letting the freshness fill my lungs. It was a new day, but something wasn't right. I turned around, still groggy from sleep, and that's when I saw it. Right next to the entrance of my tent, lying in the leaf litter, was a decapitated kangaroo's head. It was just sitting there, as if it had been placed carefully beside my tent. Its eyes were wide open, the pupils dilated, the fur matted with blood, and the neck was a clean, brutal cut. The decapitation was clean, too clean, and the sight of it made my stomach churn. The head was fresh, the blood still dark and thick around the edges, but it was the placement that made my heart race. I had set up my tent the day before, right here, and there was no way I would have missed that. There was no head when I put up the tent. No sign of a kill, no blood anywhere near the site, just the usual brush and leaves. It was impossible. I felt a cold sweat break out along my back as the realization hit me. Whoever or whatever had placed that head there knew I was there. It wasn't a random animal attack. This was something deliberate. The blood ran cold in my veins. I couldn't explain it. There was no way I could rationalize it. And the worst part was that the camp was still and quiet. No animals in sight, no birds calling, just that terrible, eerie silence that had settled over the place again. I stood there for a long moment, unsure of what to do. My thoughts raced, panic setting in. The calm, peacefulness I had felt the night before was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. Someone or something had been watching me, maybe even stalking me during the night. The plopping noise, the silence, the head. It all pointed to something that didn't belong in these woods. I didn't know who or what had left it there, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't sticking around to find out. I grabbed my gear as quickly as I could, tossing everything into my truck with shaking hands. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow. I didn't care about leaving the campsite a mess or about the trail I'd leave behind. I just needed to get out of there. With my truck loaded up, I drove out of that bushland as fast as I could. I didn't stop for anything. The entire drive back, my eyes darted nervously to the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be following me, watching from the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that I had been watched the entire time. When I finally reached a more populated area, I pulled over, my hands still shaking. I didn't know who or what had left that head, and I didn't care to know. But whatever it wasn't something I wanted to encounter again. That night, I slept with every light on in my room, every lock secured. The image of the kangaroo's head, the silence, the fear, it haunted me for days. And as much as I tried to push it out of my mind, the unsettling thought remained. Whoever or whatever had left that head next to my tent had made sure I saw it. I never went camping alone again.